series of names there. One of those will be identified as me, saying it is your name. Simply hover over that. On the right-hand side, it will give you the option to click More. When you click More, you can then select a rename. And if you need help with that, please feel free to send me a chat. And this is Dave Clausen. I'd be happy to help.
Well, we'll get started. It is 12:30, and I want to thank everybody for joining us on this webinar, this CHC Community Engagement Series that we're doing with the Philadelphia Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services. We are extraordinarily honored to have this opportunity to provide this presentation. The webinar that you are going to be participating in is entitled Federal Grant Writing 101, Show Me the Money. We have linked to it. It is going to be specifically a Philly conversation. And we are able to say that because everyone that will be presenting today has extensive experience working with communities and preventionists within the city of Philadelphia, but also have had broad experiences working at the federal level or working with federal grant opportunities on behalf of communities in Philadelphia. So we understand how to make that translation. And so I'm extraordinarily pleased to be able to help lead this webinar today. My name is Carlton Hall. On behalf of Carlton Hall Consulting, let me first and foremost thank our partners at the Philadelphia Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services, DBHIDS, who in their extraordinary leadership and visionary leadership saw that it was important to provide an investment to build up the prevention capital within the city of Philadelphia. I have had the great opportunity of working with and having some great planning opportunities with Deputy Commissioner Roland Lamb and his extraordinary team there at DBHIDS, Michelle Haywood Ramsey, and Levon White and others who have provided some extraordinary leadership. I want to thank them so much for their support and their trust in our system and in our work. As a way of introduction, letting you know that here at CHC, I've had the great opportunity of working in and with the city of Philadelphia for a number of years. I was, as the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air lyrics suggest, I was born and raised in Philadelphia. And to have the opportunity after more than 25 years working in this field across the nation, working in every state in the union, in several countries around the world, and working at the highest levels of our federal infrastructure for prevention, being able to provide support to the city I call home is a great privilege and a great honor. And so I want to thank DBHIDS for providing this opportunity to do that. You are extraordinary leaders. It's been an important partnership, and I thank you for that partnership. I would like to provide and offer my good friend Michelle Haywood Ramsey an opportunity to provide a welcome on behalf of the city and to share with us why this webinar series is important for those who are participating.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad you're able to join us today. The vision to begin capacity building and for community organizations to begin to identify partners is something that DBHIDS, specifically the Deputy Commissioner Roland Lamb, is looking at to enhance resources in the city, not just in terms of delivery of services and resources, but also working with community organizations to identify other funding streams. And with that, you're going to learn today how your organization can begin to build your capacity and your wealth, specifically looking at the neighbors in your own community where your organization lives, and how you can bring them on into your mission and your vision, and to create an even healthier community. So again, I want to thank you, and please, if you have questions, you can use the chat box, and then there will be other questions, a Q&A towards the end. But again, thank you for joining us.
Michelle, thank you so much for that. And I want to start off by sharing that, CHC, we've had the remarkable opportunity of having learning from some of the greatest thinkers in prevention over the course of the last 25 years, but not only learning from them, having some opportunity to work with many of those great leaders to inform our efforts and to bring that benefit to those communities that we serve. And so it's our pleasure to bring them to bear for the great city of brotherly love and sisterly affection, as we say. In doing that, I have asked for and received the support of my great colleague, Dave Clausen. Dave Clausen is an extraordinary prevention leader in his own right nationally. He oversees the Mid-America Prevention Technology Transfer Center, which provides training and technical assistance support to 4 states within the country, and has created several platforms around the country for preventionists to be a part of and associated with. I am more than honored that he is a part of our team here and providing some support. Dave, I wouldn't mind if you wouldn't offer our viewers and listeners some opportunity to understand how we might be able to interact more meaningfully as we go through this webinar.
Yes, absolutely. Happy to be here. Thank you very much. And I am hanging out in the background for today's webinar, serving as the producer. So I'll be monitoring the chat box and also the question portal as well. So as you look at your screen, along the bottom of your screen, you can see participants, and then there's a chat, and then there'll be a Q&A feature. There, you can enter questions into either the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen that is shown, or in the question and answer portal. And that will allow us to directly respond through typing. And then also during the presentation, there are several times that are allocated for direct question and answer. So if you put it in the chat box and we don't get to it right away, don't worry, because we've got time set specifically for those. And if you look on the right-hand side, you should be able to see the participant list. One person said it wasn't quite showing up for them. We'll check that out on my end. But if you hover over your name, you're able to rename yourself. Also, you're able to raise and lower your hand. Throughout today's webinar, like I said, I'll be monitoring that as well. So you can raise your hand if you have a question or are having some sort of technical difficulties. And then I'll just send you a message to see what I can do to help. And again, if anytime you have a question, comment, feel free to use that chat box, because we're all going to be paying attention. We're looking forward to an engaging webinar with you today. And that's all I've got, Carlton. It's all yours.
Dave, thanks so much. Thanks so much. And so we're hoping to have a vibrant and an interactive and an engaging conversation with you on the topic today. But as a way of thinking about it and a way of making sure that you understood what Dave just offered, I want to start off with just a little activity that might help us all to engage with this. And believe me, if you work through this, there will be a point to it. I'm asking you all to look at this picture and tell in the chat box, write in the chat box, how many holes, if this was an actual shirt, how many holes are you actually looking at if you do this? And if you do this really quick, I'm only going to provide about 30 seconds for this, but put in your chat box, how many holes are you seeing when we do this? And I'll give this about 15 seconds, Dave. And do you have any answers for us?
5, 6, 4, 7, 6, 6, 6, 6, 8, 6, 6, 6. Man, they keep coming in.
I got it.
Like
I
the
got it. I got
consistent
it.
is
So
6,
we have a
2.
whole range from 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I don't know if we're all looking at the same shirt or not, but here is the real answer. The real answer is 8. If you said 8, you had the correct answer. And how did I get that? Well, of course, if you're looking at this as a shirt, if I'm looking at this through, this actually represents 2 holes. This 1 hole in the front, and that's 1 hole in the back. So that's 2. Here's another 2 holes. That's 1 hole in the front, 1 hole in the back. That's 4. Then you have the sleeves. That's 6. And here's a hole to stick your head through, right? And here's another hole in our shirt. So that together represents 8. And the point I wanted to make with this, as well as making sure that we all understand how to engage, is I've heard someone say once, and this is a saying that has really stuck home with me, that if you can't see a problem, you can't solve a problem. So what I'm sharing that to say is that in my experience, and again, I've had extensive work in the city of Philadelphia. I used to work for the administration back when both Ed Rendell was the mayor, and then when John Street was the mayor, before moving on to other things. And what I can say to you from my experience working in the city of Philadelphia is that very often in cities like Philadelphia, large urban metropolitan areas, very often they are not even aware of the opportunities that are being provided to them. I've had the extraordinary privilege of working with the gentlemen that are going to be providing the great bulk of our presentation today. And for years, we have been looking at the importance of making sure that folks understood within large urban areas the opportunities that were being offered by federal grant programs provided on behalf of prevention providers across the nation that were very often overlooked, not seen. And so we've made it our business for a good bit of time now to try to ensure that those communities not only were able to find those opportunities, but take best advantage and position themselves to be successful applicants for those opportunities. Opportunities such as the Office for Victims of Crime and the Department of Justice, who provided an extraordinary opportunity for those that are working on behalf of prevention and support of juveniles who have been affected or impacted by violent crime, and including those who have been impacted by the harms associated with addiction. This is a grant that's meaning more than $700,000 on behalf of successful applicants that has gone largely unnoticed within the context of our large cities. Another one that is hugely popular around the country, but very often overlooked within cities like Philadelphia and other large urban areas, is the Drug-Free Community Support Program being offered now by the Centers for Disease Control. Here is a program that will allow for upwards of $125,000 a year for those who are looking at mitigating the harms associated with substance misuse in their communities on behalf of youth and over time adults. Extraordinary opportunity that is often overlooked. I'm very, very happy to say that as a result of engaging with the city of Philadelphia, I believe that we've been able to help support. Michelle, has it been upwards of 4 or 5 grantees in the city of Philadelphia now? How many?
We've actually had 3 grantees.
3 grants.
And currently we have 2 that are finishing up year 5.
And the vision of Deputy Commissioner Lamb, I know, has been that every neighborhood should be able to successfully apply for and get access to this line of funding. And not only the Drug-Free Community Support Program, but also the Strategic Prevention Frameworks Partnership for Success grant, which provides upwards of $300,000 a year over the course of 5 years for successful preventionists. My point being is that there are many opportunities that could help us in the work that we are doing, but we can't get those or take advantage of those if we aren't even aware of them. If we can't see the problem, we can't solve the problem. That's what this webinar really is ultimately about. And to be able to help me to do that, I could not be more proud of and honored by my association with the 2 gentlemen who will be leading this conversation. Dr. Bill Geary, who is probably known by many of you who might be participating, has been a friend of mine for almost 2 decades now. We've worked extraordinarily closely with each other over those couple of decades, working and providing support to communities across the nation. Dr. Geary, I'm going to read your professional bio now, just so the folks get to know exactly who you are. Has been successfully evaluating communities and coalitions for those 2 decades. He's the founder of Global Evaluation Solutions and the co-founder of the coalitionevaluation.com. He has been the Deputy Director of Evaluation and Research for the National Coalition Institute, working with me for a number of years at the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America. He's had the pleasure of serving as a successful coalition coordinator for both urban and suburban coalitions. He currently consults with community-based organizations, federal and state and local governments, service providers and educational systems on a wide variety of topics, including aspects of organizational capacity and evaluation and monitoring. Finally, Bill is a visiting assistant professor in, sorry about that, folks, live television, as they say, a visiting associate professor of sociology and criminal justice at LaSalle University in Philadelphia. Extraordinarily honored to be able to have you as a part of the CHC team helping and supporting this webinar. And that leads me to Tracy Johnson. Tracy Johnson leads the TTJ group, that is a consulting organization that assists communities and has a specialty in working with communities in urban settings by providing training, technical assistance aimed at violence and substance abuse prevention, reducing disparities, and working to build community organizing capacity. The TTJ group has built a reputation nationally for providing culturally responsive and evidence-based strategies for more than 200 communities and faith-based institutions, governmental agencies, and universities on behavioral health, prevention, treatment, and overall health and wellness and social justice issues. Tracy also served as the director for this the Central CAP under the auspices of the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. These 2 extraordinary leaders will be taking us through and on a journey today. Tracy's going to speak more globally about the aspects of applying for federal funds and the considerations for that as it pertains to communities that look like ours in Philadelphia. And then Bill is going to bring us home. He's going to provide us with lessons learned from actually working with communities who have been successful applicants for federal grants and some of the things that would help us in our areas. And so with that being said, Tracy, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to ask you to take this over and lead us into your part of the presentation. Thank you all. After both speakers will have an opportunity to speak, I will come back and we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. Please put your questions in the chat box. Dave is monitoring them, and we're going to make sure that we're going to speak to all of those at the appropriate time. Thank you so much. And Tracy, this floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Carlton. I do appreciate you all for allowing me to be a part of this. Thank you to Michelle and as well from Philadelphia and Levan for your support as well. So you all, I've known of Philadelphia, but I've learned Philadelphia in the last year or so. I've been able to go into neighborhoods like South Philly and West Philly and certain areas around the communities over the last 3 to 4 months. And I appreciate the opportunity. And even I had a chance of a real Philly cheesesteak. So Carlton, I thank you for that opportunity. And I hope it's not the last. I bring you greetings from the state of Illinois. But as Carlton said, my heart is into working with urban communities and really focusing on you all to build you up, to build capacity. So I honor Michelle for this effort, and I am deeply pleasured to be a part of any stage with Dr. Bill Gary because he is a phenomenal person, and I am truly excited to be a part of what you all hear. So I come to you telling you about my role. As you heard, I ran a nonprofit in Illinois called Martin Luther King Junior Community Services of Illinois. And our role was at that time as a nonprofit, we were really small in a little community, in an urban community setting in Freeport, Illinois, where we had a very small budget, but we had to begin to internally look where is our resources going to come from. And so when my role as the person providing prevention strategies to that nonprofit back in 91 and 92, it was important for me to really identify where the resources were. So I began to look beyond the city, beyond the state, and started looking at the federal level, where in fact we were able to go and raise from 1991 to 2000, before I left, 2003, well over $7.5 to $8 million annually in federal resources from many of the grants that Carlton talked about, and some that I'll give you some examples for. So it's not ever an impossibility for you all to go after those. And then I still provide and working within Chicago, South and West Side, Detroit, as well, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus areas, Miami, Florida, and LA, and also in Dallas, Texas. So I've been blessed to go around and help communities with partnerships like Carlton to really make this happen. Today, what I hope to do is really provide you all, in a sense, with an opportunity to sort of give you an overview of some key training objectives, some, find where the prevention sources are, identify the right funding sources for your organization, identify what the key points of writing federal grants is about, and then know how to measure your work, which will be a good segue for Dr. Bill, which will give you even more substantive information about measuring your work, because he has extreme good experience and knowledge in that. So definitely pay attention to that as well. So let's take a look, you all, if you will, at those funding sources. You heard some of them from Carlton, mention them, and I know a lot of times we can use acronyms, and that could get in the way. And so I wanted to list them out for you: Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, that, so you know, is your own tax dollars at work. And Carlton mentioned some of the dollars that are available there. He mentioned at one point it was the drug-free communities. Now it's being moved to CDC. But also there are some strategic prevention framework, strategic prevention framework, Partnership for Success grant dollars that I would tell you, you definitely want to look those up, knowing that grant season most of the time for federal governments normally comes around the first part of the year, January, February, and March, which opportunity gives you the opportunity to do that, usually in May or March, April, May, or June. The funding cycle will begin normally in October. So, but although that's a normal format, but you should also know that because of situations like COVID and that, there's a lot of new resources out there that are available that you can look under SAMHSA and find some resources as well. And then there's the Center for Disease Control. Well, let me go back to SAMHSA real quick. Carlton mentioned one of them, and there's another one I mentioned as well, was a Strategic Prevention Framework, Partnership for Success. But there are several as well. One is, I want to definitely bring to your attention, is the HIV Minority AIDS Initiative grants. Those grants focus on substance abuse prevention, but also how to do early prevention to reduce HIV in communities of color or in urban settings. Those dollars come out every January in terms of the announcements. They usually fund between $250,000 to $350,000 per year for a 5-year cycle. They usually fund between 30 and 40 grantees nationally. And I think that would be another great grant source for you to really look into as well. Now, you should know under SAMHSA, there are 3 key funding administrations under departments under that. That's the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention. Those were the grants that I was previously talking to you about. There's a Center for Mental Health Services, which does prevention, suicide prevention, behavioral health prevention, and those dollars are available, and they got separate grant opportunities as well. And then there's the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, which funds dollars and availability for services as well. So you want to make sure that not only do you go to SAMHSA, but those 3 different divisions that fall underneath SAMHSA, because there's some dollars that will be useful, particularly for urban settings and communities of color that are out there and available as well. And SAMHSA does have, under each one of those departments, some COVID dollars. Because we're dealing with COVID now and the impact of COVID in our communities. And so there are resources available as well in those if you want to look and take those out. SAMHSA, SAMHSA.gov, okay? And just I would recommend you peruse these and the other ones that I'm about to tell you about as well at the federal level. Then there's also the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. We know it as CDC, but actually there are some wonderful resources and funding opportunities that fall under the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and that I would recommend you go to their website and really take time out and go to their funding particular line area and begin to sort of peruse that area as well and notice those dollars that are available there. There's the U.S. Department of Justice. As Carlton mentioned, one of the examples was the Office of Victims of Crime Assistance. They have a lot of resources, not only there, but as the Department of Justice, there's different bureaus underneath there. The Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention. So under the Department of Justice, there are some other ones as well. Then you have the U.S. Department of Education. You will find some unique and opportune funding opportunities that are very available in prevention, particularly where you can partner, if you will, with your local school district or if you have a charter school, you may be eligible for that funding as well. But the U.S. Department of Education has several dollars and opportunity funding in prevention for those. But I always tell people that those 4 top areas that I mentioned to you as agencies that you want to look at, if you go to grants.gov, you will find a host of opportunities of resources at the federal level that allows you to query to identify where you want to find dollars from which agency that is available. What I did not mention, there's other federal agencies as well. The U.S. Department of Agriculture seems to get no attention, particularly in urban settings, because we think it's only farm dollars. But therein lies some other dollars for urban gardens, urban opportunities, building successful opportunities for young folks and work. USDA is one that normally doesn't get a lot of attention, but can be made available, and resources are there for you. I would recommend you go to the U.S. Department of Education. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development is another one that's not on the screen, but I would definitely recommend that you think about and look at in terms of where your resources are and other where funding resources are. But you can see those under grants.gov. And I would recommend. And then there's a Health Services Resource Administration. We call it HRSA, HSRA, Health Services Resources Administration. And I would recommend you go there as well, because there are some funding opportunities and a host of dollars that go unnoticed. And you can work closely with universities and research dollars to get those fundings as well. Now, I don't want to leave you, I want to leave you with some ideas and knowing that federal dollars also come to your states. And so your state National Prevention Network representative under your state Office of Substance Abuse Prevention, those dollars are available as well. And I would recommend those are federal dollars that come through. And then I've left you with a couple of other ones that you might want to look at as well. Grant Watch, philanthropic, other organizations. In my organizational world, I found that to be as important as well, and including regional giving dashboards as well as foundations. But I want to also tell you and then leave with you the importance of knowing what dollars to look for. And one of the things when I ran my nonprofit in the 90s and we were able to grow, the mistakes we made, I want to help you not make those mistakes. And so what I found the most important pieces about going after federal dollars is knowing what's the right funding for you. So not sticking a circle in a square peg, if you will, not going after everything you see and trying to make it fit. So one of the things I tell organizations is that you really want to make sure you have your mission of your organization is really compatible with those federal grants that are asking for it. If your mission doesn't focus on that particular area that grant wants to fund, I would recommend that you in fact look at, if you will, that opportunity to know that there's not a fit there to make it happen, okay? And so I want to make sure you understand that dynamic as well. Okay, and then secondly, the target population. You really want to know the target population that you serve. When you go after dollars, you want to be specific and you want to really focus in on those dollars that are important and the target population that needs it. And then I'll also add, you got to know the data of that target population. And then finally, when you're looking for dollars at the federal level, you want to look at the funds that fund the people only in your target area. Even if they are not located near you, there's some regional funding, federal dollars that could be available as well. Then I want to talk about, because of our time and what's available, I want to talk about the importance of looking at key points of writing that federal grant. And I have been blessed to work with Michelle and Levan and their team and Carlton with his strong leadership to really help look at what dollars are available. So I want you to know when you're writing federal grants, it's really, really important for you to create a work plan or a work plan to write the grant, okay? I think that's critical. I think the work plan will help ensure that all required documents are included and the RFP is really followed, okay? So when you're describing the real need of your community, describing it can be done through things like the community needs assessment that may have been previously or formally done or informally conducted in your community. This can be the real foundation to creating the compelling story of what is taking place in your community. Because you really want to know, not think that you know, but have both qualitative data where you're doing focus groups, just-in-time data, but also quantitative data. And I'm sure Bill will talk a little bit more about that. This would really be the foundation for helping you really create that compelling story of what is taking place in your targeted neighborhoods. It's really important to present that data that is in relation to the proposal that you're going after, so that it emphasizes the true need. This data will be used throughout the grant writing process. So you also want to be certain to really captivate that funder. The funder will be establishing credibility of your organization. So you really want to captivate them with that. You want to captivate the credibility of your board members, of your key staff. This will also be a great time, in my opinion, to highlight the organization's need, organization's goals, their needs, your organization's philosophy, and even just a couple important success stories. You want to also clearly define your goals and your objectives. And you also want to make sure that the project that you're working for, that you're ensuring your funders, that they really know that you're trying to accomplish this through your organization. Your project really design should outline the following. It should look in great detail in terms of how the project will work, how to address the problem. They want to know, really importantly, how you're going to address that problem. They don't want stories about this is what I see. They want to know how you're going to address the problem. Concise and consistently telling them how you're going to address it is important. This will be the very most important part of the proposal. This is the meat, as I call the meat and potatoes of the grant. You want to outline the activities of your project, including who's going to be the staff, who's going to be the resources, and really make sure you provide an in-depth flow chart of the organizational aspects of the project and how they're going to work within that and what you plan on achieving through this implementation. This should include what we call measurable results. You want to justify the methods and the costs throughout the proposed course of action. A good proposed program evaluation and review technique chart could be very useful, and I'm sure Bill may talk a little bit more about that. That would be helpful for you. So always know that the grant proposal summary will be the first thing that the funders review. So that when you're opening up your grant and there's a summary of your proposal, that's the first thing they're going to look at. So they're going to some are called abstracts. So when you write that federal funding, they look at that. They look at that. Although many times it's not scored, but they look at it to see if it has some validity and some direction to it. But this will be the important chance for you to press the importance of your proposal and your work. You will want to highlight the local needs, the alternatives in absence of these dollars not being available at the federal level, and as well the influence of the project before and after implementation, as well as the benefits that this funding will do after the funding is allocated. So we want you to be, I recommend you be modest, but be realistic about your budget. The budget is critical. When justifying all your expenses and details, it's really important that you outline what's really connected to the grant. Be mindful in considering the consistency in the following to not raise flags, red flags, because they'll see if you really have taken time out to lay it out. If matching costs are required, these funds should be taken out of the budget unless really asked for. When you're looking at sustainability evaluation, you want to clearly lay out your evaluation process and how that looks. And then you want to outline your future funding to continue meeting goals. And that's what we call sustainability. Because every federal grant really wants to know, how are you going to sustain that effort? Any one of those grants I mentioned early are really critical and will outline to you, ask you to say, well, how are you going to really fund this? How are you going to continue this after these dollars are going away? And so remember, sustainability should always be starting at the very beginning once they fund you that federal money. I find that a lot of the communities that have done that early on have been able to pivot, if you will, and identify other federal resources or local resources or state resources to really make that happen. And then what I always say, there's always review the logic or the process of your plan. Does it make sense? Does it have real follow through? Does it have a framework that says, if we do this, then this will happen? Does it follow that? And that will be very, very helpful. And then I leave you just a little bit of understanding that you measure your work. And that when we talk about evaluations, there's that process evaluation, there's that impact, there's that outcome, and there's that summative. And I won't go through this with you because I know Dr. Bill is going to cover this. But I do know is that I always tell people when I ran my nonprofit, it was the outcomes that was critical, but it was the process that made the outcomes happen. So when we measured the process, sign-in sheets, who came, number of people came, that also gave us an understanding how our outcomes are going to be. And when we measured outcomes at my nonprofit, or when I work with other communities in different cities, we talk about the changes in knowledge, the changes in attitude, and the changes in behavior. Because at the end of the day, dollars are shrinking, so they really want to know how you're going to change things and measure the attitudes, knowledge, behavior. Those things are really critical. So I appreciate the quick opportunity that I've had with you. I hope that it was beneficial and useful for you. And I'll let the questions and answers come at a later minute, but I would like to, it would give me great honor to pass this on and stop sharing my screen to allow my good brother, Dr. Bill Gary.
All right, well, thank you very much, Tracy. And thank you, Carlton, for having all this together. Let me share the screen, sorry. I guess that's helpful. There we go. So we should be, once I find the start button. All right, so some of you already know me. I don't want to talk a lot about kind of my background. I am a city dweller. I've lived in Philadelphia for many, many years. It's one of the ways they came across Carlton, certainly Michelle. Lived in the city. Right now I'm living in Doylestown. So a little bit kind of outside the range, but in the background, you know, behind me, you can see the skyline. So I thought I would include that. What I want to focus on primarily is some of the lessons that I've learned from working with coalitions in this city and working with other inner city coalitions from the perspective of evaluation. And as Tracy discussed, he talked about quickly covered the different kinds of evaluation. My presentation is probably going to be a little short on that kind of specific lingo, Tracy, just so you know, but I think you'll see all the bases are going to be covered there. So let's just go through what some of the important things to know, not just for the application that you're going to put in, although obviously that's critically important, but we'll also talk about just some of the things that you should be considering when you're thinking about evaluation. And if some of you are already working with evaluators, or maybe there's a couple of evaluators on the call, I think this might be helpful. So the place I wanted to start is the place that's most obvious for those of you who have been around the city for a while. You know that there is this thing in Pennsylvania called the Pennsylvania Youth Survey, the PAYS survey. And I thought it'd be good to put up a map. In the green are all of the places where the PAYS survey, which is sponsored, or it gets hosted by Penn State University, and they have a live website and all this for PAYS. The green is where they do it. You will notice that down in the bottom corner there where it says Philadelphia, that is not in green. You'll also notice that Allegheny county on the other side of the state is not in green. So one of the biggest challenges that I think coalitions have is trying to figure out how they're going to collect survey data from sometimes youth, sometimes adults, community surveys. I mean, we've done both, when the PAYS is not available, right? So how do you do that? And I think another challenge, quite frankly, and because political correctness was never my strong suit, so I'll just say it, the school system can be troublesome to work with sometimes in terms of getting permission from the school to have a survey done either during class time, maybe during school, or even after school at school events. It's very difficult. So what do you do? You know, there are some grants specifically like the one that Tracy was talking about and Carlton talked about, the Drug-Free Communities Grant, for example, that the primary piece of data collection that most coalitions use is some type of youth survey. So if you are in an area where you do not have access to that kind of survey, and Philadelphia is one of those areas, what we've done is worked with coalitions to help them design their own surveys. And the rules about designing your own survey, first, of course, and foremost, follow grant expectations. You could do a whole thing on survey development, right, and how that works, but hopefully you'll be working with an evaluator who has some experience with that. You can cut and paste from other surveys that exist. When I was working with a coalition years ago in the city, they were trying to use what's called the Communities That Care survey, and I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but it is a novel. I mean, I think it's like 20 some pages long. And they were trying to give that survey out at events where youth were. So they collected lots and lots of data, and then I became they hired me as the evaluator after they collected all this data. And in going through and trying to clean up the data, it turns out we had to throw out almost the entire data set because obviously kids were getting really impatient, right? They'd fill out the first couple pages and then they would just start checking boxes off. And so you don't want to use the whole survey. You want to use the minimum number of questions that the grant needs and that you think you need answers to through that. Be creative in the data collection process. As I said, I've worked with coalitions who have worked with sports teams for youth in the community that are not associated with university or with the schools, of course, church events that kids go to, fairs, anything where community centers, like there's a Y, Police Athletic League, you got to pick up the data where you can get it, right? So be creative in that data collection process. And as Tracy talked about, when you are writing a grant and you're going to talk about the kind of data you either already collected or you're going to collect, we like to use what's called mixed methods. When I'm reviewing grants, I'm often looking for, do you have different kinds of data that you're collecting? So are you collecting survey data, for example, but then are you also collecting like interview data, things like that, right, which would be more the qualitative data. The surveys would be quantitative data, but it's just a mix of data because different kinds of ways of collecting data reveal different parts of the story you're trying to tell in the grant application. So be creative about that. Another challenge that people have working in all inner city areas, not just in Philadelphia, but of course there are particular interests in Philadelphia because it is a city of neighborhoods that have, they have very, in some parts of the city, right, we have very clear cultural demarcations, right, in terms of different audiences. So sometimes population flow becomes a problem. So even if you get into the school and you do a survey, a youth survey, you may find out that 3/4 of the kids who are in that school maybe don't even live in that local neighborhood. Or you could have adults who are passing in and out of different neighborhoods. You know, you live in one neighborhood, you work in another neighborhood, you go to weekends in another neighborhood. And so when you're trying to deal with community norms and you're trying to change things in a community, that can be a real challenge because, you don't have a stable population that you're always working with. So some ways that we've tried to work around that and some things that help if you're trying to tell your story to grant providers, is that you have some understanding of how people are moving from one area to another area in the city, right? You have an understanding about the kinds of people who live in the community that you're trying to address versus the kinds of people who are transient in that community. They come there for work, they come here to shop, whatever. Having some information on that is helpful. It's also helpful if you're going to focus on a specific community, and this is what we've done in all the communities in Philly that I've worked with. People tend to not go from, I guess, they will not attend a town hall that is not in the community that they're living in, usually, right? So if you have a town hall in that part of the city that you're living in, or that is interested, for your community as you've defined it for the grant, town halls are usually a pretty good way to get people to come together who actually live in that area. We have also done door-to-door, where we have local folks that maybe people in the neighborhood know them, right? They have a good reputation. And so we connect with them and they help us go door to door and literally just asking people questions that we can then use as data points. So you can do that as well. Show me the stakeholders is another issue. The Philadelphia Inquirer recently did an article about turnover in the Philadelphia school system. I thought this graphic was a pretty good one because I know that it's impacted a couple of coalitions that I've worked with in the city. And often one of the stakeholders for a grant will be someone from the school, and usually it's maybe a principal, a vice principal, could be a teacher. But when you show success in the Philadelphia school system, one of the things that tends to happen, particularly at the administrative level, is you get moved. And often there's not a lot of, we don't know that move is coming. Maybe, you have a few months maybe to prepare for that. And that does not work just in the school district. We've had that happen with police, particularly police, because usually you're picking patrol officers or something like that. They move around a lot in the city. This is very common. So what do? You've cultivated these stakeholders and then all of a sudden, boom, they go away. You feel like you have to start from scratch again. So some ways that we've tried to address this, and again, this is helpful to put into a grant application if you have the space for it, is to talk about how you're going to have something like partner mentoring, where you'll have, as part of the MOU or the understanding with that partner, that whoever is currently assigned as the stakeholder, if by some chance they get transferred out of that community, they will work with someone in their organization that will take over. You could also build agency support from the top down. This is always a good idea, even if you don't have high turnover, but we're looking to institutionalize so that the precinct that you live in, for example, there's just this common accepted understanding that someone from that precinct will always be a part of your grant, right, of your initiative. And then you could always have double reps, right? That is to say that you could always make sure that there are two stakeholders from those kinds of organizations where there tend to be a lot of turnover. Show me the progress. I thought I would point this one out. The next two are kind of lessons learned through inner city and some of the challenges, because I was actually a grant coordinator in an inner city environment, and I've seen this happen as well. And Tracy talked a little bit about this already. I like this phrase, take the first step in faith. You don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step. And what that means is, how are you going to measure success? It's very important to measure success in inner city environments because they're constantly moving so quickly, and partners are coming and going. As we said, build in those quick wins. And when I say build in, what I mean is when you're developing an evaluation plan with your evaluator, where you're thinking about what are you going to measure, as Tracy was talking about, think about what are these short-term things that we can hit on that show that we are successful. And we'll talk more about that in the second one. You certainly want to celebrate, make a big deal out of every step, right? I've told my daughter many times, if you don't blow your own horn, who's going to do it for you, right? You need to celebrate when you do something right. You don't have to brag about it necessarily, but you definitely, as a coalition in an inner city environment, when you have quick wins or you have any type of success, you should be bragging about it, absolutely bragging about that as much as possible. And what's really important I've found in inner city environments, and I don't know why it seems to be more important in inner city environments than it does kind of out here, for example, in Doylestown. But you really want to show how each step moves you forward, right? You want to be very clear on what your roadmap to success is. And, you know, we've achieved A, B, and C, and now here D, E, and F are coming, right? To show where you are on that map. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in lesson 5. Inner city environments, not just inner city, but it seems to happen more in my experience in inner city environments, where failures, initiatives that fell apart, it's harder sometimes for people to let go of that when that happens. And I don't know why that is. It's just my experience. This happens also with evaluation, by the way. A lot of people have evaluators and they'll have a really bad experience, and then that will, you know, impact them for years because they will, you know, not be trusting. And this can happen in inner city environments where you can have past failures, programs that you thought, you know, were coming in, oh, it was going to work. People get excited about it, then it falls apart. And when that happens over and over and over and over again, the community begins to lose hope or lose faith. And so part of what you may be wanting to establish right out of the gate is how you're going to overcome that. How are you going to build trust, community trust about what you are trying to do? So an important step for that is showing how even small success creates a change. This is different than knowing what the steps are, right? This is saying we did this and here is the impact of what we did. This is the number of people that were impacted, and this is how they were impacted. Even if it's a small change, it's very important that the community understands that. To do that, you need to be communicating early and often about your successes with the community. And it's also very important that you demonstrate how you're going to be building the skill sets of partners in the coalition work, in your prevention work, because that is going to be a key element in terms of sustainability, as Tracy was talking about, but it's also a reason that people come to the table, right? You become not just a place where people come so that they can do good for the community, you become a place where they can come and actually learn how to do stuff that will help them in their job, help them maybe in their personal life. So always looking for the opportunity to build skills. As an evaluator for so many years, I definitely, when any group that wants it, they get it, and that is this idea of shared participatory evaluation. I'm always happy to work through a subcommittee, say, of people who are interested in evaluation and teach them the skills that I have, because I think it's important that they have it. So building new skills definitely gives you a leg up on the competition if you are able to show that you can do that. And then, of course, lesson 6, show me the best practices, right? Use a standard evaluation framework, make sure that's clearly delineated in the grant application, because it shows that you are going to be engaged in a credible evaluation process. Look for experienced evaluators or partners who have some type of experience in dealing with not just data, but collecting information from the community, right? We call that data, but really it's just information. Look for people who have experience in that particular grant that you're applying for. When I'm reading grants for the wide variety of folks that I do grants for, I definitely, that's a feather in your cap, as the saying goes, if you're able to work with an evaluator or a stakeholder who has already seen some success in that grant. I think that's really important. Also, you should be working with someone who has experience in your particular community or community type. So you'd be looking for people who have experience dealing with the ins and outs of Philadelphia, understanding how the school system works, right? Understanding how the government works in Philadelphia, knowing how things play out between the police department and the community. Like it's just important to have someone who understands the flow. And then of course you always want to work with somebody who's flexible, because doing inner city evaluation is a lot like herding cats at times, and it really requires you to think on your feet and solve problems that in other places you wouldn't necessarily have. So you need somebody who demonstrates that they're able to think on their feet a little bit. So just very quickly to kind of close this out, a couple of things that I usually get asked. I've been doing evaluation work for over almost, God, I just realized I transcended saying over 20 years to now almost 25 years. Oh man, all right, well, that's depressing. All right, so do you have to have an evaluator before you apply? Most grants you do not. Be sure to check that. For example, the drug-free communities, you do not need to have an evaluator before you apply. This is very important to know because I think selecting an evaluator is a critical piece of your success. And I know how most grants get written. they tend to have a very short turnaround in time. And if you don't know anything about how to find an evaluator, it just adds more pressure. So if possible, make sure, but if you don't have to have an evaluator before you write, then don't burden yourself with that. Take your time after you get the grant. Take some time in picking that person. Some may require it. So you will have to have that pressure. Is it okay to pay someone to help me write and then hire them as an evaluator? And the answer from an evaluation standpoint is no. That is unethical according to the American Evaluation Association, of which I am a member, and hopefully any evaluator that you would select would be a member of that. I know that there are a lot of evaluators who will help write it for free under the hopes that they will then be selected as the evaluator if that happens. That's quite common to happen, but you should not be paying somebody to both write and then writing them in on the grant. That is unethical. And then where do I find one? Well, I put a screenshot here, one place, American Evaluation Association. As you can see, you can search by name, you can search by state, country, of course, locations. You could put in Philadelphia if you wanted to. Anybody who is a member of the American Evaluation Association has probably put their name into this database. You can check with local universities. You can ask Michelle. I'm sure she appreciates my saying that. But typically, universities, Michelle has some experience in where to find evaluators in the city, and the American Evaluation Association, those types of professional associations, you can find them there. And then some key Google searches, which I thought I would do here just in case. Just do Google searches on I do have a free YouTube channel that covers a lot of stuff about for example, the different types of evaluation that Tracy was talking about. I have stuff on qualitative, quantitative data. There's lots of other resources though. For example, the American Evaluation Association, do a Google search for that. There's a thing called the Community Toolbox. If you're not familiar with that and you're thinking about doing some type of prevention, community-led prevention, probably you should be looking into that. There's a ton of resources in that. The Coalition Evaluation, as I just mentioned. And then if you do a search for the CDC Evaluation Framework, that's where that picture came up that I used earlier when I said that you should use a well-recognized, credible process for evaluation. So I think we'll address any questions as we move forward. I'm gonna stop sharing because I think, Carlton, do you jump in now? He's saying yes. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing. I thank you all for your attention. If there's anything else I can provide, please let me know. I offer tons and tons, as Michelle knows, of free advice. So if anybody has questions, my email's up there. I'm happy to help out. So I'm gonna stop sharing, turn it over to Carlton. Take it away.
Terrific. Thank you, Bill. Give me 2 seconds here. Let's do this. And there you go. All right. So first and foremost, thank you to both Bill and Tracy for both extraordinary presentations and very meaningful for the city. Here's what I'll share, folks. My experience in working with the city and working with the national prevention kind of funding apparatus, what I will tell you is that the fraction of grants that come to communities within inner city neighborhoods, such as the ones that we are working with here in Philadelphia and across the nation, is abysmal. I'm saying to you all that there is a reason we're having this conversation. And that is because there are three themes that came out for me from the presentations that were offered. Number one is that there are opportunities that we are not seeing. And in order to see them, in order to find them, well, as Tracy mentioned, we need to do some research and understanding of those various websites that we need to begin to develop a relationship with, right? SAMHSA, CDC, justice, education, and the like. Secondly, Tracy mentioned and talked a lot about how we need to learn, and this is my framing for it, how we need to learn how to speak the language of those federal grants, right? And so to recognize that there is a language that's associated with successfully navigating that grant writing process. And Tracy began to share with us the components of breaking all of that down and learning the process of how to translate the great work that you're doing, the great work that you're doing within the city, to translate that into a language that those reviewers will understand. Many of those reviewers have never stepped foot. The only thing that they know about Philadelphia is what they may see on the news every once in a while. And so there is an importance for you to be able to understand how to tell your story in a way that they will appreciate and understand it. And then Bill talked to us about components and aspects of helping them to understand that by making sure that we're paying attention to describing things well based upon and telling the story of our community, telling the story of our stakeholders, looking at our progress and how we translate our progress. How do we describe the hope that we're trying to offer in our communities, and making sure that we're doing that all relevant to best practices and evaluation practices. And so that has been an extraordinary time. I'm going to start off this Q&A. We're just going to have a few moments for question and answers, but I'm going to pose this to both Bill and Tracy. Tracy, I'm going to come to you first. Given what I just shared about the fact that far too many grant opportunities are coming and going without many of our community members getting involved with it. What I am asking of both of you is, what do you think are the biggest hurdles or challenges that you've seen from those communities in trying to apply for a federal prevention grant? And folks, we've been focusing, there's a lot of federal grants. We've been focusing almost exclusively on substance misuse prevention primarily, because that's kind of the way that we work and engage with the city. So I'm coming to you first, Tracy, with that. Unmute yourself.
I think one of the biggest pieces that is really critical to particularly in urban settings and anybody else as well, but I think it's one of the things is that just answer the question. Don't go no farther. Answer the part that they're asking you to answer. Do not gloss. Do not go. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Don't get big. Don't get glossy. They're going to ask you that question, and then later on, they're going to ask you that question again. So you got to be able to be concise, be focused, and respond to the question. That's one of the things I found, that a lot of issues that I found in a lot of urban settings is that they want to tell the story about wonderful stories, don't get me wrong, but if I'm in Keokuk, Iowa, nothing against that, Dave, but if I'm in Keokuk, Iowa, and I am a reviewer, I am told to only respond to the question to make sure to grade the question based on if it was answered as asked.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And so if your story is not asked, then it is not answered. If your story does not connect to the question, then it becomes almost moot, y'all. So you gotta be specific, be concise.
Thank you for that. Bill, your same question.
So I think that is a critical piece that Tracy's talking about. It's probably the biggest mistake that I see also, because there is, I think, an assumption that sometimes people have when they're writing grants that the people who are reading them know where they're coming from. I think the other thing that's really important is demonstrating the skill set and the partnership set out of the gate in terms of their experience, in terms of what specifically they bring to the table. There's a lot of vagueness in grant applications, not just around what Tracy's talking about, which is the story of the community that you're in, but there's also tends to be, I think, more vagueness in this idea of who's going to do what and what qualifies them to do it. So I would say that that is a key piece. I think if you do both of those things, you do that, Tracy suggesting, you follow up with the specific skill sets on who's going to do what, I think that really puts you a leg up on many inner city coalitions. Those are the types of mistakes that I see the most.
Perfect. Thank you. Hey, Dave, I know you've been monitoring this whole time questions that would have been coming up in the chat and the Q&A section. Can you lead us off with a couple that may be there?
Yes, well, actually, y'all have been on top of it in the chat box answering some of those questions. One was regarding the evaluator's fees, and Michelle indicated that those are included in the budget accompanying the submitted proposal. And then Bill put the link to the Pennsylvania Youth Survey in there as well. So if you didn't see it in the chat box, the link to that survey is there for you. Several folks are curious, though, if they can get a copy of the slides from today, because there was just so much information in there. It's hard to just grasp it all and process it. And so will they be getting a copy of the slides?
So yeah, Michelle, I don't know if we might be able to do this, but I can provide a copy of the slides to you, or I can go ahead and send out a version of that to those that are registered. So if we can, one way or the other, they can get it. They can submit a request for the slides. If you're interested in the slides, some folks may not. If you're interested in the slides, go ahead and reach out to Michelle, and we'll make sure that you get a copy.
And for those, I'm sorry, Carlton, and for those who, there are some names that I do not recognize. So you can also, I'll put in the chat box my email. And so you can email me, and then I'll make sure you get a copy of the slides.
Not a problem, not a problem. If you email either Michelle or myself, we'll make sure that you get a copy. No problem.
There was some interest around talking about evaluator fees, rather than just list out those questions. What do y'all think? What are your thoughts on evaluator fees?
Bill, how much should we pay folks?
Well, if I'm the evaluator, then it should be $10 million.
We went down to 0 viewership just now.
So yeah, so the fee thing is really interesting. So there's a couple things that I wanted to speak about with the fee structure. First, if you want more information on the fee structure, you can check out, I do have a YouTube video just on that, because there's actually a lot of issues there. But covering the basic ground there, most grants limit the amount of money. Obviously, they tell you it has to be a certain percentage. I think you need to be aware, though, that is not a check that you should be writing to an evaluator. If a grant says that you have $10,000 that can go towards evaluation, you should not have an evaluator who's charging you $10,000 for that service, because there are other kinds of fees associated with evaluation on your end. So, for example, every time I have to submit a report to a client, someone on the client side has to read and review that report, and we're going to have a conversation about it. That is money that basically, if you're paying me all the money for the evaluation, that you are providing free, okay, on your end. So there should be a certain percentage of the evaluation fee, which includes data collection and all that you hold on to as an organization, because your organization is obviously going to be a part of the evaluation process as well. The evaluator is not going to do everything by themselves, right? So you want to make sure that you're setting some of that. Also, thinking about travel is important, but I think the real big one is think about, and two things, I guess, off the top of my head. One is, how should people apply to be the evaluator? I think that my favorite way to do it, and the way you really separate the good evaluators from the not so good evaluators, is you make the evaluator write a proposal for the evaluation. You have them look at the grant, you have a conversation with them, and then they sit down and basically write you a very rough draft of what could be called like an evaluation plan. Here's what I think you should be doing. Here's the kind of data you should be collecting. Here's how we're going to collect that data. Make them do that. If an evaluator is not willing to spend the time to do that up front, what makes you think that they're willing to put the time in later for you, right? So evaluate, I know it's a hard line and a lot of evaluators don't like the fact I say that, but you should absolutely do that. It should be a request for a proposal, and you should delineate what needs to be in that proposal. The other thing is, it does not have to be an all or nothing game. I am very much in favor of hiring out evaluators as consultants. That is to say that we agree that we're only going to use your services at key parts of our process. We will pay you when we do that, but I'm not going to write you blindly a check for $10,000 so that, you know, you can check your email while you're watching Netflix, and you know the evaluator is getting paid for that.
Preach.
Having some type of an invoicing service where you say, okay, but so be aware that you can do that too, right? You can say, I'll pay you for X number of hours of service. Whenever you give those hours, you invoice us, and that's a pool of money that we'll draw from. Right? And if we don't use all that money at the end, as an organization, we keep it. If we need to include more, then we talk about how we do that. It does not have to be an all or nothing deal. And again, an evaluator who says it has to be all or nothing is not demonstrating the kind of flexibility or communication, I think, that an evaluator who's good actually shows to a client. So that's my 25 cents. It was a lot more than 2 cents.
It was a good 2 bits, brother. It was a good 2 bits. Thanks. Dave, any other questions?
Those are all that I had queued up in the chat box.
That's what I thought. Michelle, you have one comment or question?
One's coming in.
Okay.
The question is there a central location where community-based organizations can do a search for RFPs? Because sometimes it's difficult in monitoring what applications are coming out. And I do know that when I see an application, whether, you know, Carlton, you're sharing with me, or someone else from a federal office is sharing with me, I send it out to everyone. So it's really about, is there central location so community-based organizations can kind of stay on top of what looks appropriate for them to apply for?
Got it. I'm gonna start off, and then Tracy, I'm gonna turn it over to you. I will say first and foremost, listen to what Tracy offered initially. Tracy said the first thing you need to really do is understand yourself. Understanding what it is that you are doing, what it is that you're trying to do, what's the opportunity that you're trying to, opportunity for change that you're trying to define, and then match that to the appropriate grant opportunity that's coming up. So that's number one. Number two, what Tracy offered is there are some specific websites that you should develop a relationship with, right? So go and develop a relationship with the SAMHSA website. Go and develop a relationship with the CDC website. Go and develop a relationship with Justice's website around their grant opportunities, because they have a whole host of different grant opportunities. There are some, though, that are specific and germane to prevention, but that's developing a relationship and beginning to understand that apparatus, I think, is what will help you more. Tracy, are you aware of a centralized website that you would offer?
I mean, for federal grants, I would take them to grants.gov.
Grant.gov.
And then you can query on the left-hand side if you're looking for justice programs for youth. Yeah, it'll pull up the applications, or if you're trying to do, you know, plant potting for young African Americans. I don't know if it gets that detailed, but if you could actually, it
We
allows
pop
you.
plants, man.
Yeah, I know, but believe me, I found that out. I've seen a lot of that when I was there in Philly. um, um, but you know, that grants.gov really gives you a query opportunity that will allow you to do that. And then once you get on those organizations, they'll send you stuff
Right.
of announcements. So
Right.
once you click on and go to their site, and you want to be on their site, they'll click and they'll send you grant announcements. I found though that for me, in my experience, if you go to grants.gov, it's a little quicker than the organization is going to send it out to you. I just found that out. You know, because the organization has, you know, these lists of names, but grants.gov is they're telling you what's coming out before it's going to actually hit.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so that's a good piece.
The only thing that I would add to that, or just caveat that with, is that the reason why I emphasize getting to know the individual sites or
That's important.
agencies is because you can go to grants.gov and understand and see the request notification, but to really understand what's really being asked for and what the context of that application is, what is expected, all of those kind of things. You got to understand the culture of some of these federal agencies to best position yourselves to be successful in navigating those opportunities.
And then have somebody on your staff that will be dedicated to maybe developing that relationship. That's what I did with Justice when I started when I was my nonprofit.
Agreed. So that's a wonderful segue to the fact that in the city of Philadelphia, the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services has really made a commitment to building up the prevention workforce in the city of Philadelphia, and made it a priority to look at where and how to build the capacity of those. And so in that light, we've developed a relationship where we'll be providing additional webinars and additional support to communities. It is our sincere hope that you'll be getting some more information about this, but that we will be able to engage with you all there in the field. It has been an extraordinary honor to have this opportunity to work with you all, to have this conversation. Tracy Johnson, along with Beverly Watts Davis and Raylette Pickett, have been the folks in the country who I believe has been most responsible for getting the greatest amount of access, or providing the greatest amount of access and support to communities of color in this nation to get and become a part of this. I am so honored and so blessed that you are a part of our team and working with us. Thank you so much. Bill Gary has been extraordinary in his authenticity around the evaluation process and access. As you identified, don't take that $10 million quote that he offered earlier, but understand that what he really was saying to you all is something that most evaluators would not share with you. And because of that character of being, he has been an extraordinary partner with us. Thank you so much for that. Dave, thank you so much. Michelle, thank you so much. I'll leave you all with this, that it is so vitally important for us to take advantage of these opportunities right now. We all know what's going on in our world, in our space. It is the time now to gain some mastery in the opportunities that are provided to us. As Dr. King indicated, there is no time for complacency at this point in time. So thank you all for not seeing it as robbery to spend this time with us, to be able to sharpen the saw just a little bit so that we might be able to do what we do a little bit better. It has been our extraordinary honor at CHC to be able to provide this webinar to you all. Michelle, thank you, and to all the leadership at DBHIDS. We appreciate you all. We will make the PowerPoints available to those who inquire about it. And thank you all so much. We're looking for you next time. Take care.
Okay, I just want to share with everyone, without CHC's help, I mean real help this year, there would not have been much sleep going on in my house. With CHC's assistance, the whole team, we were able to assist 9 community-based organizations submitting their proposal applications to 3 different federal announcements and 1 state announcement. So prior to CHC coming on board, I was solely doing that in a solo format with reaching out to evaluators such as Bill, like, I need you right now, and I'll make all the pound cake for you, whatever you need. But it's real important that you understand DBHIDS is unlike any other behavioral health system, is that they're taking full advantage of accessing additional resources outside the city to support the CBOs here, because we know that the data collection is going to be difficult for you to access, but guess who can access the data? Okay, you don't get that in any other city. The other is that we can help support CBOs with those data sets as well as identifying other resources. So again, I clap to the team for being available at my beck and call on weekends, early mornings when people are out jogging, and really being a big help to Philadelphia. Thank you.
It's our honor. Take care, everybody. Thank you all so much.